Alright, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be ranking all the gene/races in Budokai Z. Roblox, my bad. Alright, moving on. Our basically first, here we go. We got Warrior Namekian. This one's a B tier. It just got an Evo with this update, but it didn't really change much. I mean, it did. It made it a solid race. I think below, or like before, it was probably like a C tier, but now it's a B tier because the new passives and the new evolution made it up there. Next, we got Dragon Clan Priestess. This one's an A tier, or Priest, my bad, Priestess. This one got a huge rework basically with the new evolution, giving it a staff that gives it 10 times key multiplier and 10 times key damage, I believe, which is insane. Plus its new passives and to like buff people's latent multiplier, I believe, which is also pretty good. But just from all out, this evolution like carried it. Its stats are good, its passives are good. Her stats are alright, but the passives are good. Moving on with Hanma S tier. They made it unobtainable this update, so yeah, but it still remains with the Fighter's Imagination passive. They give it a 1.75 VP gain. Plus, basically with Kaioken, if you max out its melee multiplier, you have a 1.7, and that's just insane by itself. Plus the passes make it do more damage too, so just all out, it's crazy. Next up is another A tier Ancient. This one's above Dragon Clan Priestess. It has the best mode in the game, SSJ3, with a 2.35 multiplier, I believe. It does have Drain though, sadly, but for right now, this is probably the best, one of the best PvP races, just because this mode is so high. But yeah, it has a Drain of like 1 key per second, which isn't really that big of a deal. But for its mode multiplier, it's pretty high. Its Zenkas are pretty good too. That's about it. Its stats are pretty mid. Next up, Android, one of the worst races in the game, or Cyborg, sorry. There's nothing really about it. All of its passes are dookie. Its stats are really bad, and it just has no form to itself either. It's just bad, so I'm putting it there. Next up is Android 21, the new gene. Android 21 is another a tier, my bad. Basically, Bio Android has got Absorb, Zenkai, and a bunch of other things with it. So, and its stats are pretty good too. It's got basically a permanent with its passive. You get a permanent 110 power output. And if you have bad karma with it, you get a damage boost. And if you have good karma, you have like a damage reduction boost with it. Plus its mode, which I think is a 1.9 or 2 point, plus its 110 power output multiplier, just stacks. So bam, and it's just really good. Basically better bio. So next is, I think, Child of Chaos, I believe. This is going to be above that, just because I think all Sphinx are going to be S tier in this tier list, just because they're just all good. Their passives and the BP gain, it just makes it all like insanely well. So I'm just not much to talk about here. It's just good. Next up is Conscript, probably going to be like the last A tier, mainly just because it's got fast limit breaks and fatigue doesn't really affect it. It doesn't slow it down or make them weaker, and they have fast limit breaks. Plus their mode, Bio Armor, gives them a 50% damage reduction, which makes them really tanky, so that's mainly why they're up there. Their stats are pretty bad besides that, besides Dura. Dura is where they excel, but besides that, it's pretty bad. Fast limit breaks are really good though. Next, we got Demon. Demon is going to be above it. Frost Demon. Basically, 2.1 mode, Overflow, Frigid Fury, Death Beam, all the good stuff. Mid stats, basically, but besides that, all pretty good. Next up, we got Majin, all Evos included, so Majin's going to be right here, I believe. Majin, obviously Absorb, its stats are really good, especially with Kid Buu, with good Dura and good attacking stats, basically putting it basically peak combat race right here. Plus, you know, just in general, having, you know, Absorb is nice, and all the evolutions are pretty good, plus the stats. Mainly stats are why it's here. Next up, we have Hybrid. Hybrid is going to be above Majin, I believe. Mainly just because it has like one of the highest Zenkais in the game. And it has a 2.15 mode. Plus, actually I think that might be it. But it also got a pretty good BP gain. I think it's like a 1.5, which is pretty high for a Saiyan. So that's mainly why it's there. Its mode's good, its Zenkai's good, and its BP gain's good. Besides that, the stats are kind of lackluster. Next up is Saiba. Saiba is a B tier, although it has a 1.7 key multiplier damage, I believe, which is insane, the highest in the game. Reason it's here because it doesn't have any passives, and the other stats about it are kind of bad. think it has high BP gain and a high key multiplier damage, but like besides that, they're pretty mid. So I would just put a B tier because no passives makes the race like really bad, but I guess its key damage makes it mid, so that's why it's in B tier. Next up is Majin, one of the new ones they added. Majin, basically has really bad like 0.8 key and 0.8 melee. Pretty good damage. I believe they get absorb. I'm not sure though. But basically, when they're below 50% or some like HP, they get a chance to hit a 2 times damage or key like boost. Basically, that's like a random gamble. That's mainly why it's there. So it's basically a gamble race, and I wouldn't really like rely on it. So that's mainly why it's there. Next is El Hormino. El Hormino is C tier because Janago, the warrior base, basically the more common version of it, is better, has a better mode. They have the same exact stats, and Janago just has like the meditation, and that's really about it. It converts latent to power output boost. It does it by a good amount, but I wouldn't say it's like anything crazy, and it's moded like I think at most is like a 2 point. So that's why it's there. Next is Bio. Bio is probably going to be basically top of A tier. Bio evolution gives good melee damage, really good key damage, good BP gain. Basically they get absorb and Zenkai plus last stand, and they get what else do they get? That's actually about it. But I feel like the thing is that maybe makes them like not as good as they should be is that they don't have their own passive to themselves. Basically they don't have like their own like passive, so that's mainly why they're not like good, but their stats are really good. It's basically Saiyan but with good combat stats is how I put it. Next is one of the newer ones, Meta Erosion. Meta Erosion is probably right here on scaling. Only reason it's not higher is because like it's got really bad stat, or not really bad, but like, actually yeah, pretty bad stats. They're not like anything really good. Mainly reason it's high though on A tier, like pretty mid on A tier, is because it's passives. It's got passive healing and good damage reduction, plus high skill cooldowns, and it's got a death beam. Not as good as normal death beam, but it's still got a death beam that does high damage, so mainly why it's up there. Next up is Triclops. Triclops is I think right below Dragon Clan Priestess. It's a human, so Fighter's Imagination gives it a 1.75 BP gain basically. That coped with the fact that it's got its own beam that does pretty good damage. It's got 4 witches or whatever it's called, which gives it another melee plus key boost. Kaioken also makes it way stronger. And then yeah, they just get all those in consideration. It makes it a pretty solid race. Next up is one of the newer ones. I think this one's probably the best in the game right now, Olympian for the humans. Basically, it's Hanma, but with the conscript fast limit breaks, which basically makes it really good. It also, I think, doesn't have Fighter's Imagination, but basically the same thing like it, but they get basically like a 1.6 or like a 1.7 BP gain, so basically the same, not much of a difference. Good passives, fast limit breaks, good melee, that's why they're there. Next up, we have Warrior. Warrior is going to be right behind Perfect Cell, I believe. Warrior, the only reason it's up here is because it's also got SSJ3, but not as a good multiplier as Ancient. But the main reason they're here is because their Zenkai is really good, and they have good leech gain too. They have the best Zenkai in the game. Next up is LSJ, probably the top of A tier. LSJ is here because it doesn't... Oh, no, holy moly. The only reason LSJ is here because it's got a 1.75 times BP gain, good Zenkai, and a 2-point mode. And that's mainly why it's there. Its stats are pretty good too, but I feel like maybe it should get a buff for being a 1%, but still, regardless, it's top of A tier. Next is Super Cerulean. It's an S tier. Super Cerulean gets really good melee damage with their passive pressure points, which activates when you hit a target, and then like little points pop up, and if you use a melee skill, it doubles that by like 2 times, I believe, if you max it out. So that's 2 times the melee damage with their melee multiplier already being like what, 1.4, 1.5. So that basically makes it like a 5 times almost. And plus they got a 6 times key damage multiplier too with their 1.9 or 2-point mode. Basically meaning that they have really high damage for they're basically like a peak combat race. The only thing they lack a little bit is BP gain, I believe. I think it's like a 1.4 or 1.5. But they have an insane leech gain with a 1.75 or like a 1.7, which is insane. But just like normal shadowing potential. It doesn't really have much. That's why it's there. Next is hit. Arguably the worst one in the game. It's got a 1.6 BP gain, with its passive being the more melee skills you hit, the higher the damage gets on it, the more like higher the outputs get. But if you get hit once, it resets the output back to 0, so basically your melee is you normal. So it's a pretty useless passive, and it's being D tier because it's just, that's all it's got passive wise. Its stats aren't really anything like amazing, so that's why it's D tier. And it doesn't have its own mode, it's got full power. Next is, I think this is a warrior. Warrior doesn't go above Android 21 because it just doesn't have like the same aspects as the other Sphinx do. I'm not really putting the Sphinx in much order. I know that Chaos is the best one, but I'm not putting these two in order. This one is in order though, so yeah. Second best in A tier, Superhuman. Superhuman gets a 1.9 mode with the 1.6 BP gain, I believe, with the Fighter's Imagination passive. Plus Black Flash, which if they land it, basically gives them a like 110 or 120 power output. Plus Kaioken, basically granting them like insane amount of strength right there. And yeah, just basically all of that combined basically makes it like incredible like damage basically. Next up, Warrior Janago. Warrior Janago is better than El Hormino because I think the mode is better, but like barely better, like by like 0.01 better. They have the same stats and everything. This one just has a little bit of a better mode. Next up, Demon Clan. Demon Clan's like right here. Demon Clan is basically Warrior, but a little bit better because the passives are different, and I think the passives are better. So that's mainly why it's here. Next up is Mutant. Mutant is better than Meta because it's got a 1.75. It's already got the normal death theme that this one has Demon, but it's got it for Mutant, which is a 1.75 BP gain with death theme, plus Overflow, which puts the key skills on like the cooldown reduction, plus they do higher key damage than the rest of these two. All out, just making them a really good key race, and yeah, they do high damage, and they have a really good BP gain. And a 2.1 mode, forgot to mention. Oob is probably the bottom of S tier, only because they have the highest BP gain in the game right now, 1.95 I believe, with their 1.55 BP gain plus a Fighter's Imagination human passive, which grants them a 1.95 BP gain. So that's the main reason they're S tier, because their BP gain. Fighting potential, they're not much, probably the weakest in like the human category. I know it's a Majin gene, but basically a human. They have a passive that grants them 50% more damage, but they take 50% more damage if they get hit. So it's pretty risky, but it's pretty good. I wouldn't really recommend using it. But they also get Kaioken, which kind of makes up for it. So yeah, that's mainly why they're S tier. Next is Yardarat. Yardarat's probably above hit. It's got a pretty good mode, or it's a 2.1 mode. That's the only reason why, or 2-point mode. That's why it's above hit. Its stats are pretty lackluster though, so that's mainly the reason why it's there. Alright, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe. I'm homeless, and thank you.
大地を踏みしめて君はなためてゆく天使の微笑みですれ